I had a good childhood. I mean, up until I was homeless, I had a really good childhood. In isolation, I found inspiration. If you look at my books, especially the early ones I did on purpose guided education, the mantra is the dream needs to be stronger than the struggle.
Hello, and welcome to the Liberty Spenders podcast. We are Kurt and Kristen Luidhardt, your hosts and co-founders of the Prosper Group, an agency that's raised over $500 million and elected over 100 members of Congress, 14 governors, 15 U.S. senators, and 1 president. And now, in addition to helping political candidates get elected, we're helping your business get elected by answering this question: what if you could exponentially grow your business by tapping into a unique and lucrative audience we call Liberty Spenders? Now, Liberty Spenders are politically conservative or faith-based consumers, and they're looking to buy from businesses that align with their values.
We have a very special guest today, Dr. Jerry Pattengale, who we know from Indiana Wesleyan University. We won't bury the lead. He was one of our history professors at Indiana Wesleyan, but from there, he's been all over the place being a true leader in Christian scholarship, media, and education. Dr. Pattengale was one of the 2 founding scholars behind the Museum of the Bible, where he served as the executive director of education. He left in 2018 to finish a book and a film series and to serve as interim president and CEO of the Religious News Service. Came back, but he's also done things like speaking at the United Nations on Capitol Hill. He co-authored the 2020 TV documentary series Inexplicable: How Christianity Spread to the Ends of the Earth, and a book by the same title.
And that won 3 Telly Awards.
Oh, yes. And a prolific writer, in addition to national pieces in the Wall Street Journal, Inside Higher Ed, Christianity Today, Chicago Tribune, Washington Post. He's wrote a bunch of books. We'll talk about that today. He's appeared on a bunch of TV and radio shows, including, of course, the Liberty Spenders podcast. He's including the Heroes of Faith show on TBM, Janet Parshall, History Channel, TBN, Glenn Beck, CBN, Eric Metaxas, and a forthcoming appearance on the BBC. And what he's known for in Marion, Indiana, is the host of a very important weekly golf outing of everyone who's important in Grant County. I'm not sure how you make it all happen. I have marveled at this a few times, Dr. Pattengale, and I have a theory I have been developing that you have a secret twin and you're doing the work of 2. How do you get it all done?
Well, I've been accused of having doppelgangers, but every time they come forward, I go, if that's my doppelganger, then that's not good. Just the way I grew up and everything, I just get up early and I don't really have any hobbies. I do golf some, but my hobbies fold into the kind of things I do. And so it's been kind of fun. And, the other day I was talking to some people who are retired, and they were talking about how could you set a tea time on the weekend at the crack of dawn? And I almost fell over. It was 10:30. And we started talking about, I said, I've got half of my workday, and it was on Saturday. It's like, I have half my, because normally I don't stay up really late. My wife and I might watch a TV show together, but I don't spend time I really don't just spend time on the fluff thing. I just don't, and we might watch reruns of Frasier or something, but, and try to watch an hour of news.
Of course you do.
Yeah. I watch an hour of news a day. I try to watch an hour of news, but I tape it the night before, and then I watch it so that can speed through commercials. So anyway, that's what I try to do, and I try to take people serious when they're present, and sometimes I might be a little aloof, but anyway, so that's how I survive, and I've done it all my career. So
well. We have so much that we're excited to talk to you about, Dr. Pattengale, but it was funny because before we started this and we were doing some prep, I had told Kurt that, I would love to just quiz your brain on time efficiency, and you're such a great networker and connector of people. And there's really just so much we could grill you on. We will not do that today, but For those of you listening, we're not just saying this because we know him and he was a very instrumental professor of ours, but he truly is just a remarkable person. There's a lot to learn. So we're excited to get into it with you today.
Yeah, well, but you started in Buck Creek, Indiana, which sounds exactly like the kind of place that's perfect for growing up poor in, right? And I've read some of your great Buck Creek columns, and they have so much in common with what J.D. Vance, who's also in the news these days, wrote at Hillbilly Elegy. And I thought, give us a glimpse of going from Buck Creek to now working with billionaires at the Museum of the Bible.
Yeah. So, I had a good childhood. I mean, up until I was homeless, I had a really good childhood. My dad was not bad to us at all, as far as we knew. We didn't know the whole story at the time, but we just didn't have any money. And so we drove through a creek to get to our house. It was a flat roofed house that he built, never finished the roof. And we'd have sagging plastic over the bathroom. One of the stories I wrote is about a 4-foot snake dropped in front of me while I was showering. And, so I caught more snakes. I fished. I ran miles and miles of creek beds collecting crawdads and selling them for a penny each. And so what happened was, early in my life, I became task oriented. So you guys know me probably, the other side of me, where I might come across as kind of a socialite or whatever. But by the time I got to college, I might goof around, but I'd stay up all night to try to ace a test. And I would do that in private. I would hibernate and get away in private to do that. So what happened in my childhood is I had a lot of fun, and it helped sharpen creativity, but it also made me very task oriented. Even on this golf course last night, I found 41 balls in a half an hour. And so if I go walking, I'll go walking back to the woods, and I literally will find balls. I give them all away. I don't sell any of them. And I can't not do that. In fact, in a cancer services a tournament, one of our sons had cancer and he's fully recovered, or almost fully. But so we were supporting a cancer outing, and they walked over the woods. They go, "Look at all those balls in there." And all they were doing was testing me to see if I would jump in the woods and try to find the ball. And there weren't any balls.
There
weren't any balls in there. They were just doing. I didn't fall.
Oh, that's a cruel prank. That's a cruel prank.
Anyway, it's the task oriented part of my youth, and obviously, I learned by watching and observing. We never went to church, so church didn't come in my life until later. But that actually gave me structure when that happened, and social structure. But it was a good childhood, extremely poor. I know what it's like to go to a store with food stamps, and hearing J.D. Vance talk. On my LinkedIn, I actually posted something about J.D. Vance. Hearing him talk, I can relate to those stories. The difference is there's 8 kids, and we were all together, and we lived out in the woods, and we had a lot of fun.
A beloved hometown of New Washington, Ohio. Maybe not quite like Buck Creek, but a place that formed a lot of my childhood. What would be part of your journey that you think really helped shape you as you became the author and educator and museum curator that you are?
In isolation, I found inspiration. Creativity is a job half finished. So you have to figure out how to get to your destination. And if you look at my books, especially the early ones I did on purpose guided education, the mantra that probably is the reason I have this facility here. It helps sell a lot of books. Is the dream needs to be stronger than the struggle. And so I had to learn early on, even before became a Christian. I had to learn how to have a mature dream and how to pursue them. And in failure, what I learned, because I obviously had a lot of failures. And so, you just had to be creative. In fact, when I was homeless, I literally would, sleep in the linen closets at the Holiday Inn where I worked. So I graduated as a junior from Harrison High School, and fortunately, I had a job there, and and so they found out, and they allowed me, and they would kind of let me know which rooms I could stay in, and so I didn't have to sleep in my gremlin very often. But the lessons I learned really had to do with you know you know creativity, finding that positive resolution for things, and tension. And the tension was obviously I didn't have money, and I needed to survive, but I had a lot of plans, and it really worked out. So that for me, that really helped. And by the way, on the Holiday Inn story, one of the neatest things that could have happened. So we were doing a remake of our New Testament theater at the museum, and that one of the key sponsors is the heir of the Holiday Inn fortune, and Jack and Betty Moore. And during the major interview before the final deal was done, Harry Hargrave, then the CEO of the museum, he said, "Jerry, you might tell them your connection to Holiday Inn." And I said, "Really?" And when I told, and in fact, I don't have it right here. It's in the other part of my office. But uh, when I told that story, they started crying, and I started crying. So here we are, the last steps of a multi-million-dollar situation, and it just was a natural thing. And they knew the hotel I was talking about. And it's
Oh,
by
wow.
Purdue. It's no longer there, but it's Holiday Inn North. It was the big showpiece at the time. But I learned a lot about life, and it actually kept me off the streets most of the nights, and out of my gremlin most of the nights when I didn't have a place to live. So it's just a neat story. I wish The one thing I wish I could have done better is I wish I would have kept copious notes of the different peoples that I met back then.
Mhm.
Mm.
For me, when I became a Christian, I felt like when I got in that old gremlin and got in the highway after that night that I became a Christian, I felt like I was driving somewhere. And I didn't know where it was, but I felt like there was a purpose involved. And you guys have been one of the biggest campaign strategists in the United States in the last decade. And there are some parties and some positions that seem to be taking people to a positive place. And once you believe in that, you can really go all in to help do that. And I learned to have a lot more grace. If I stepped on the same couple today, I would have taken a different approach. Probably would have asked if she was okay. I probably would have said, "Hey, you want to
Right.
talk?" By the way, I went
Right.
back to them. I said, "Let me come back." I said, "You guys want to?" I said, "Let me." And I brought them. I went to the hotel, which wasn't too far up the beach. Brought them back a couple. I think I had Fanta or something, or Orange
Yeah,
Crush
yeah.
in Spam. I had a
Mhm.
can of Spam, and so. But I would do things differently today. My age, of course, but um, yeah, I just felt like, and I feel like today, if you can help people to figure out where they're going is something positive. And a lot of my early books really highlighted the life wedge and finding what your overriding passion in life is, where your values are. In fact, all of England, their high schools would used my discussion on noble causes in their curriculum. So
Wow, that's incredible. I did not know that. And what you said before is so true. You said it a little bit differently, but having a big enough why, you were talking about that as your motivation. You had to have a big dream. And that's just so true for anybody, any business owner, entrepreneur, really just anybody who's got goals and wants to accomplish things and keep themselves accountable. As we've learned, you just really need to have something you're striving for that is bigger than yourself, that's bigger than your ego, your desires, and that's what keeps you focused. The more you can stay true to that, the more you can keep motivated to be productive and to not, waste a lot of time, which you clearly did not do much of.
yeah, the adage is that the why is big enough, the how will show up. And I I just believe that you needed a plan B, but you really need to be all in on plan A. And that's the difficulty a lot of people have. And especially in some of the conservative traditions, the religious traditions, especially where it's really hard. Failure is really hard. And again, all of us have had those. And so you just have to figure out how to find a different route to where you're going.
If you speak about failure, there's a favorite teacher of mine, Keith Cunningham. He talks about some of us, we think about the things that maybe we wish we could do, but if in reality, we might be better off if we could choose 2 or 3 decisions we made in our past and just roll them back. And I always like to ask people, like, if there was a decision or two that you could, as you look back, you say, you know what, if I could just have made that one differently, that would have made the biggest impact. What comes to mind?
Well, it's interesting because financially, there's a definite decision. When I was a teenager, I actually bought an IRA. Remember, I came to
Mm.
college at, I graduated at 16, but I bought an IRA. And the one decision financially that I regret is that I cashed it in at 30 years old to help a couple buy, they needed help buying a house. It's in California. And so I bought a really nice condo on a lake. And the market kind of went crazy, but condos took a dive. And so eventually, when Cindy and I married, we got out of that investment, and they were in ministry, so I was trying to help them. And God wanted me. I believe I was supposed to do it, but on the financial side, obviously, what I did with that money, I lost probably $1 million by today. And so,
Mm.
I mean, just lost. I mean, it's gone, and plus they divorced. So, yeah,
Oh,
so that
that's
was really,
unfortunate.
really difficult for me. But God's blessed me. I mean, it's there's 10,000 unsolicited manuscripts that are sent to publishers, every year. Tyndall House told me that, University Press. So to have all these books out and everything, I know that every one of them, I still celebrate every contract. I don't take any contract lightly. After all these years, I still celebrate. We got to eat. I'll take a picture and hold it up and send it to people. I'm still as giddy about the contracts as I am as finding a dozen balls. I mean, it's exciting. It's exciting, and I know I'm blessed. If you saw Scotty Scheffler after he won the gold, and he just starts crying at the national anthem, and he did that. I mean, he's the best golfer in the world, and what he did at the Olympics was just amazing. But he wasn't arrogant or anything. He just was I just can't believe what I've been able to do. I can't believe, I get to be a part of this. And so for me, even though I lost money there, I have been blessed. The billionaires that you mentioned, they're wonderful people. Most people don't know. I've never asked them for a raise. I've never asked them for money personally. Yeah, they'll give me a retainer to help them do things, but I've never asked for anything from them, and try to be responsible in the way I approach it for consulting and everything. But I just enjoy the journey, and I've tried to decide to do things where when I put that sign up like Reagan did at the Reagan Ranch, it's the last thing you see before you go out to see Air Force One is that sign. It says something like, "Now I ride into the sunset of life." And he knew. I mean, he knew he was slipping into dementia. I hope I have decades before that happens. But he had served well. He had tried to serve judiciously. And I think all of us, we make those decisions to do that. And David Green's books, talking about billionaires, David Green's book and lifestyle um, has really spoken to me. So you mentioned the golf course. We don't make a dime from this golf course. It's all an investment in the community. I mean, I don't know if people know that, but we're not making anything off of this. And in fact, it's a big chunk of what I could have used for other things, and I'll never get it back. But I get it back in different ways when I see these people come out here and the joy they have in their journey. And I've had so many people come up, and a couple people grab me by the cheeks, and I'm 66, so they're like 86 or 96, and like, oh, we're so glad we still have a golf course, and I don't know what I would do in life. Well, there are other things to do besides come out to, but I know that it's something that has made a difference in the community. And we intentionally decided after living in a castle off and on with the Van Campens, we were really good to us, and then a beautiful Grand Haven. wherever we chose, we wanted to plant and stay there. And I said, let's go back to my roots. And we came here, and it's been a joy to stay in the same community for 30 years. You can't always do that with business. Our youngest son is extremely successful in business, and he's wrestling with that right now. Michael, he's doing really well, and he may have to move, but he's really tied his community of Indianapolis as well. So it's been a fun journey. I wish all of you listening, you know, these folks, sometimes when they're wealthy, you feel like they're untouchable. These folks are just down to earth people. One of the things about the Greens is that, for them, if you try to make an impression, that's the impression you make. And they just want genuine. They want to know where your heart is. Obviously, they're doing business all over the world with 1,000 stores and biggest margins, I think, in the retail space of theirs. So they're doing really well there.
Right, it's a perfect opportunity because I know you're in the process of writing. I wasn't sure if it's your 51st or 52nd book, but highlighting careers among financial and business geniuses like the Greens. Maybe you can give us a peek under the covers of what you're working on.
Yeah. So this has been exciting. This has been an exciting journey. So what I've done for the last 20 years is I have started to take those notes. Even here in my office, for example. So if you come to this is an old chicken coop, 100-year-old chicken coop. So you would sign this guest book. The very first person in this guest book is none other than, some of you won't know the author, some of you know her well, but the very first person in here, I don't know if you can see this, is Jeanette Oak. And Jeanette,
wow, that's amazing.
Jeanette Oak she sold a lot more books than John Maxwell. That tells you anything. And John sold probably 40 million, but she's probably sold 50 million, the best-selling author in the history of Canada. And it was a real joy.
I think I saw pictures you shared. Were you just with her recently?
Yeah, it was right here. Yeah, actually, the pictures are right here. And she came out, and it's a long story, but basically I was able to help her sign a book because, her publisher, she had retired and came out of retirement. So can you imagine, after publishing like 50 million books, selling 50 million books, she's written about 70, not having your publisher not accept your proposal? And that's what happened. And so when she approached me, I knew her son really well, Lauren Oak. He's a great guy. And I said, let me make a call. And, they had her sign, Ron Beers, John Farrar at Tyndall House. They had her signed within 3 days, and that book was going to press, and it'll be out soon. So, and she's one of those types of people. And I said, one of the things I just asked, I didn't take any I didn't take anything for helping people sign, which people make a living doing that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Shannon Marvin, Dupree Miller, Celia Yates it was my agent with Johnny Moore in that book. I just said, I would like to sit with you because I'm working on a book, and I'm going to share it here. And I've tried to trademark it unofficially several times. It's Borrowed Intelligence: Learning in the Shadow of Geniuses. And I've been working on that book for 20 years, and I'm about ready to really move it forward. But I go through different people in life that I've met. I mentioned the Greens, the Van Kampens. I've been very fortunate, and to God be the glory for this, $42 million in grants in a very short time, and helped with hundreds of millions of others in different ways, grants and other things. But Bob Van Kampen, I worked for him, and Bob became wealthy through the commodities markets. And Bob helped me to understand the bottom line. He helped me to understand, how to get from A to B with finances. And I was there to help him build a collection, this ancient collection, which became the center for the Holy Land Experience. Tom Arrington, Prasco Drug, there's a genius. You go to Mason, Ohio, and you're going to see the most gorgeous, complex and attachment community. He has 2 minor league ball diamonds built within his a generics drug place. I love the guy. I called him a 79-year-old teenager in an article I wrote on him. Scott Pyle, one of the best financial investors in the world, I think. And BW, Brian Woods. If you know Waco Ventures, Brian also helped start Shane and Shane. So to write on these folks, Edwin Yamauchi is a different kind of genius. Edwin Yamauchi is my mentor. He knows 36 languages or 26 languages, can't remember. Still alive. We still have written together. Um, One of the people in this book I wrote about in Religious News Service on January 6th event. You can find it there, but it's on Glenn Martin, our person we had in common. And I had a file. Keith Jury had said when he was a professor, he said, always keep a file. What would you do if you ever had a chance? And so I kept a file. How would I use Glenn Martin if I ever had a chance? And I used him in many ways, but to write about him, when January 6th happened, I was able to take his brilliant outlines and everything and distill them down into speaking into that moment. And I don't know if you two remember, he said, the Capitol has been attacked once. He said, so why would you think that it could not be attacked again? And he said, it'll happen, my friends. It'll happen. And it happened in a way different than what we ever thought. And whether it was attacked or not, it's a different story. I work with Christian Ascalon. He's one of the most brilliant linguists alive. He's about 40, Coptic scholar. He's the one who cracked the Jesus wife code. I wrote about that in the Wall Street Journal, that Jesus wife gospel, excuse me. Recently I was able to interview Brandon Lake and Brooke Ligertwood. And if you follow music at all,
musical geniuses.
Oh my goodness!
Yes.
And
Big fans.
I didn't get to know
Big
Brandon
fans of
as
both of
well.
them.
He's our sons. They love his music. So I started listening. Phenomenal voice. By the way, he shows up without his hair long, and I thought he cut it. I didn't know you could put it up and still shave the sides of your head. Brooke is the real deal. I work with her husband Scotty quite a bit on a film, kind of an immersive film project. Justin Brearley, I just came back from London and met with Justin Brearley for about 2 or 3 hours. Mark Markowitz and Justin Brearley. If you Google Justin, you'll see as hundreds of thousands of followers, that are following his unbelievable series and Ask NT Wright Anything. Someone that you two know that you might, I think you'll agree hardly, Eric Turner, P. Eric Turner.
Yes.
Oh, absolutely.
When you look deeply at what he has done, he has been a kingmaker and a queenmaker. I think of Lori Reeves recently. But what he has done and the way he has transformed a whole community is amazing. Admittedly, he's one of my best friends. Ron Blue. I was able to bring Ron Blue to Indiana Wesleyan. I met Ron. I was filming him in London years ago. He came and he was doing a devotional for us. And Ian Duncan Smith was the main speaker. He runs the finances for the parliament, for the government. And Ron came up to me and he said, "Hey, I'd like to meet you, but if you know Ron Blue, there's other people like Christopher DeHamill. There's a businessman in Texas, and he's got a unique place. Byron Stinson. He's got oil wells, and he's got a tech business for trucking and all that. And there's just many people like that I've been fortunate to work with. And there's people in the religious space early on. James Dobson was a Sunday school teacher, and I sat under John or James in this very church where Pete Maravich died, playing basketball. And so for me to help bring those stories and what are the common things in them, and there's different kinds of geniuses. Lencioni just wrote that book on the different kinds of geniuses. I thought, like, oh, rats.
Patrick Lencioni.
He beat me to the punch on that. Well, about 20 years ago, McGraw-Hill flew me to New York City to Madison Square Gardens, and they wanted to sign the very book that I'm talking about. And, I still might do that someday if it's offered again, but I walked away because at that time they wanted me to take on, Lencioni was just starting, and this author named Malcolm Gladwell. I'll never forget, we were at an Italian dinner there by Madison Square Garden on about 100-degree day. And I said, I like his writing, And, I know this whole start, my friend got his office. They actually kicked Gladwell out, and my friend, Michael Cromartie, got his office at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. It was pretty funny now, of course, Gladwell's so famous and Michael's unfortunately passed.
Whoops.
But I remember sitting there. It was one of those moments where I thought, you're wanting me to take this entire book in these other 3 books we were talking about, and you're wanting me to funnel them into all business principles, all business stories. And I know you're speaking a lot to business folks and business expenditures. And for me, it really wasn't what I wanted to do with all 3 of those books. And
Mhm.
I in my soul, I just felt like, it wasn't for me. I thought it would be dry as scholastic dust if I did it that way. That my writing style, and it was the Buck Creek stories that hooked them. I mean, those are the
Yeah.
ones that got the attention
Mm-hmm.
of the wider
Mm-hmm.
presses. And so I walked away. And I'll never forget making that phone call to Cindy. That's before cell phones. And, it's like, you sure you heard the voice of God? Yeah,
Yeah.
it wasn't
Yeah.
indigestion. I mean, because,
Well, because it was, you turned it down. I mean, it was a pretty sizable deal, wasn't
it
it?
would have been, yeah. It stopped right at the dinner because I flew all the way out there. I'd already done 2 books with them. And so they were out of Burr Ridge, their educational division. So I was happy as a clam to sign those 2 books and travel the nation, spoke on those, and they help, buy it. It's you take a royalty check and you buy a car, and it's like this is like head spinning. I came from Buck Creek, so raising crawdads, and so all of a sudden this is happening. Well, I walked away from them, but I said I'm still going to do that book. I don't know when I'm going to do it, and in the process, these other books came about. And recently, I had a major publisher call me and say, "Are you ready to do that book now?" And so I need to get with my agent and really finalize that. Again, at 66, I hope I write another 20 years. Will that be my opus, or will the Martyrs book I just did be my opus? I don't know. I'd rather someone said, they introduced me as the person that's written these dozens of books, and I'll say I'd rather write one to kill a mockingbird.
Yes.
I would rather write one to
Sure.
kill a mockingbird. And one thing before we move off of this, speaking of Malcolm Gladwell, his recent, not his most recent book, but I read it, read many of his books, but he wrote a book called Talking with Strangers. And you don't hear a lot about that book. That book really helped me. I'm in the news because, I helped blow a whistle on a guy who stole more manuscripts from Oxford, probably in recent history of any theft. And he sold at least 183 of them around the world. And we happened to buy some. And I was in the room when he offered the first. I think they're the first ones he offered, the quote unquote first century mark. But I remember his book helped me to understand how I missed him, how I was hoodwinked by this guy. And I was hoodwinked. And so were 183 other sales, and tens of millions of dollars worth of items being sold. And we default to trust. We default to trusting people that they're telling us the truth until they give us a red flag. And I didn't have a red flag in that deal until I was walking through Waco. I was a fellow at Baylor for years, a senior fellow, and I was walking through Waco, and someone said, "Hey, there's the castle that Dirk Obing bought." Dirk's the one who's in the courts on this. Who got stole the things, and I said, "He did what?" And they went, "Well, if you've watched Chip and Joanna Gaines, it's that castle that they redid." So when I turned him in, and then the Greens and others pursued him, and the charges were brought. He sold that. Well, that's the same castle. So that was the red flag. It's like I know what professors make at Oxford, and overall they make less than people make in the United States. And I didn't know how he could possibly buy a castle. So anyway, this whole journey, I still learn from other authors. I read when I spoke on the Hill, the Faith and Law. They asked me the question, "What do you read?" And, I could name them many people that I read. And, I started, it was the day Michael Gerson died. And a lot of them had already signed off on Michael Gerson. They said he's too radical against the ultra conservative branch. And I said, Michael still is a great writer and he's a great thinker. I disagree with some of his premises. And so, just like George Will, but Russ Douthat, uh, um, Sarah Paulian Bailey. You could go on and on about people that you read. And, right in front of me is Fareed Zakaria's Age of Revolutions. David Brooks. I was fortunate to interview David Brooks. If you saw that on LinkedIn, he actually wore my tie that night on. I gave him a red tie. I said, "There's too many blue ties on your show." And he actually wore it on his show. But I think we need to.
Well, speaking of these amazing people, though, can you distill a couple lessons for us? A couple of things that, not to give everything away, I know you're still working on it, but what might you highlight so far?
Yeah. So when I think of some of the greatest lessons, from people is one of them, Richard Foster. Richard Foster, I was sitting with him, and is when Dallas Willard was still alive, and it came out later in Celebrations of Disciplines. But it was in taking your area of study seriously and having intentional times of knowledge gaining. And, Richard Foster wrote one of the most popular books for his era in that field. And that was the chapter that resonated the most with me. So, that's one of the things, is having a structured way to take in more knowledge. Scott Pyle, I mentioned Scott Pyle. I was just Cindy and I were just at his house in Myrtle Beach, just this gorgeous place. And I think his closets are nicer than our house. Seriously. They're bigger than this. They're bigger than this chicken coop. But what he does is he has a routine that he can zero in on the stock markets. All you mega investors, if you don't know Scott, you should. But he has a routine it's early in the morning where he's watching international news. And let me tell you one story. This is a fun interview. I took him when I spoke at the United Nations, he was in the crowd. And we went over from there, and it was when I was still at the Religion News Service as interim president. I took him over there in New York City to the main hub, the offices for Associated Press. And I'll never forget this. We are in the glass meeting room. So there's one floor above where we were at. We went up there too, saw the famous pictures of around the C-suite walls, the napalm bombing and the children running, the naked children running, and these iconic pictures. It was just unbelievable. But we were meeting in this room. COVID is starting to hit. No one really knows what it is. I got it that day or the day before from Eric Metaxas. I was on his show. Eric says, "No, you didn't get it from me." I swear I did. But Scott, because he's reading the national markets every morning, at the end of this talk with my friends at the Associated Press, they said, "Do you have any questions for us?" And Sarah Norge and some others were there, and she's vice president. He goes, "Yeah, what do you think of this thing that's happening in Wuhan?" And then one of the executives there said, "We're checking into that. We just sent a journalist over there to." When we got back in the escalator, whatever it was that he had chauffeuring surround, he's on his phone frantically, and he ended up doing a 30% cash flip on all of his investments. And he said, "Jerry, I've been studying this, and if I knew more at that moment about Wuhan and the Associated Press, the market was going to get rocked." And you realize how many hundreds of millions of dollars that he made in that car. It was amazing. Now, he doesn't I'm sure he has ones he'll say, "I can show you some real losers." But that moment I saw firsthand with Scott Pyle, his ability to do that. And it comes out of his routine, his disciplines of staying, with the studies. And so establish those disciplines. I learned that, first with him. With Glenn Martin, the reason I think that I was able to land these fellowships, like the NEH fellowship and other things, is I entered these discussions and I had an outline by which to evaluate what I was hearing. And he told us we would have that. And so I learned from him, when I first came into that class, I'll never forget. So remember, I came out of being homeless, this long-haired guy sitting there. I was there because I got a free place to live and food. And this guy starts talking about ontology, teleology, axiology, and epistemology, and the presupposition analysis. I'm just like, whoa, you know, and then, he said, remember this, my friends. He goes, the ultimate question is not one of philosophy, but it's one of theology. Am I who I am because of who God is, or is God who he is because of who I am? And it just stopped me. I thought, that's a brilliant question. No one's ever asked that question. And so I learned from him asking the right questions and having an outline to hang what you're going into meetings with. Now, I know that's not what exactly he was doing, but here's what I also learned. I learned by what he was not doing. As I went through the 4 years with him, and I realized he had never published, really. He had never really published. In fact, at that time, we could only trace, and later when I came back to be in administration, writing the grants and stuff for Indiana West End, we could only trace 3 books written by sitting full-time faculty members in the history of the university. And I said,
Oh,
I can
goodness.
change that.
What a loss.
Yeah, what a loss.
Yeah.
And so David Bartley and
Yeah.
others in London, they were able to collect his thoughts and put it in a book. Well, I said, I am going to go to a secular university. I'm going to go to a good university, whether it's an Ivy League or, I was accepted at all the places I applied, including over in England. But I chose to go to Miami of Ohio to study with Ed Yamauchi. It was a state school. And that was one of the things to this day that fuels me to publish it, because I saw the value of someone's life, but could have been more valuable, could have been more lasting, I thought. But maybe God did that. I don't, so that it would spur me on to do that. And so, so the lesson I learned from there is, having a skeleton when you go to a meeting to hang things on. And by the way, even this interview, you saw my notes, I think in outlines.
Well, and a framework. Yeah, a framework for decision making, a structure to your day. All those things are so important, like you said.
Yeah, so that's really helped me. And the other lesson I learned is that this is trite, but to major in the majors and not the minors. I went to a Jerry Lucas memory workshop. Some of you know Jerry Lucas. And I would go to crowds about 250, and I'd memorize everyone in the crowd. For whatever reason, I can memorize. That's the lowest level of the hierarchy. Is it Maslow or the Bloom's taxonomy? It's the lowest level, but I could do it, and it was fun. And then I realized I was doing it for the wrong reasons. I should use that brain width. Right now, they're talking about how thinking hurts. It's a big thing in the news this week. And I was expending a lot of energy on the minors, and I needed to spend that on writing those talks. And I still do that every now and then. I might memorize a list of things, but I don't do it because I thought it was drawing attention unto myself. And I'm not an entertainer. I have a face for radio and a voice for writing. And so, God has put me, I think, where he wants me,
Yeah, I remember getting an autographed copy of Inexplicable. I'm not sure when we saw each other, but it sat on my shelf for a little while, and then maybe 6-8 months ago, and now it may have been a little less than that, I picked it up and read through it and found it. I just had my highlighter and I was highlighting, and I remember really reflecting on the idea that, Inexplicable, for those who haven't read it, really covers so much of the history of the Christian faith and how we went from 12 disciples to millions, if not hundreds of millions of people in the Christian faith, and the heroes and in some respects the villains that we talked about in that story. And I found it challenging because there were some great stories of people in the veins of folks like Sister Teresa, who did a lot of good in the Lord's name. And then there were stories of people who did a lot of bad. But somehow God used to spread the gospel in some of the places where people used faith in the cruelest of ways, the whole section in the conquistadors in South America. But how, despite all of that, the Christian faith thrives there now today, arguably because of some bad motives. It was it could probably have been, 6 inches thick, that book.
Well, actually, that was the hard part. So what you didn't know is you had a book about 250 pages. The original manuscript is 1,000. And because it was the background, for the film. In fact, if you have a copy of my Martyrs book I did with Johnny Moore recently, took 7 years. We really pushed that out during COVID, and it really helped. But they cut 100,000 words from that book, and so
Yeah.
that's hard.
Oh my
Yeah, they
goodness.
wanted. So you're talking about business things. They wanted to sell the book, so it couldn't be too much longer than that. And so and during that time, I started a long article. I haven't published it yet. It's about 20 pages already. It's called The Theology of Zoom Staging. And I
Mhm.
started looking during that time of what you see with people. I'm on the National Press Club's membership committee, and we meet. We have journalists, and sometimes you'll see the different backgrounds and background. Journalists aren't pretentious, not the ones I know. They're great people, and what you see, what you get, and you might see their laundry on the folding door in the back in a small New York studio, or it's just kind of
Mhm.
interesting. And so in this process, I think we learn from each other, and we speak into each other's areas, and we try to learn. One of the things that I wasn't planning to talk about here, but if I could, on these books that I've written in the films, I have a couple different groups of writers that I meet with. The main
Mhm.
one, four books are with three of them, and seven books are with two of the three. Um, so Todd Ream is probably the most prolific person, I think, in America right now in education. And then Chris Devers, both of them are doctors, is at Johns Hopkins. We meet regularly, and we email a lot, and we pump books out. And so the themes of what we're doing, are together. And in these other books, I will take a group of people. I had 150 people involved in one of the projects for the museum, but I would use, and you would know, a young guy named Nick Deneff, and Tim Dalrymple, who's now president of Christianity Day. We would divide and conquer, if you will, and it took many years to produce these things. And so I would encourage people. Not everyone's going to get on board and march. They're just not, or they're going to suck the life out of you because they just want to be around people that have done things. And so I have to be careful with that. There's nothing wrong. For me, one of the things I did when I was in administration is I cut all the committees. I cut all the committees I could. I really did. When I came to Indiana Wesleyan and they started asking me to take on more and more and become, ipso facto over the academic areas, I cut so many committees. That's the days you guys used to call me Dr. Pass or Fail instead of Pattengale. And so part of it is just being wise and intentional about your time. And so, like, I don't just go drive places. You know, I have what I call serendipitous socializing. You're going to think this is crazy. I can tell you
Yeah. Oh.
almost every coffee shop within driving distance, and probably many of the baristas, because I will just go and I'll say, I'm going to go for 2 hours, and whomever I meet there, I'm supposed to meet. Like, I met Jeremy Summers the
Hmm.
very last time I went, and Jeremy Summers and I are we end up with a meeting out of that. If you look at the strategetics LinkedIn piece that I did, that came from one of those. I call it serendipitous socializing. Is that those are scheduled into how I survive? Because if I get up, like,
Hmm.
this week, I got up at 3:30 one day to get some work done. I've got some people overseas I'm interacting with, and Australia and London. And so if I don't do that, by the time 10 o'clock comes around, if I don't watch Frasier, I've done nothing but work all day. And so when people see me, they think life's just, a bowl of cherries, this, that. But like yourselves, you don't build the largest company of its kind in America by sleeping in till noon. You just don't do that, or by going to parties all the time. Or when I see you at a football game up in the press box, you're in that press box because you're somebody. You're invited to the president's press box or Turner's because they appreciate what you've done, and the crack of dawn is not 10:30. And so
Yeah.
so anyway, that's Yeah, it's
Well, and I'll tell you, you add in a couple of toddlers, and that really changes things for you.
Yeah.
So
Well, and I'm not going
that
to,
cuts down the work time even more.
we're not going to get many more invites to the Turner press box if every time I go up there, Indiana Wesleyan routes his favorite football team.
that's funny.
Dr. Pattengale, I know from a couple of conversations that you're part of a kind of accountability or action group that you and Johnny Moore helped Scott Pyle found, who you talked about earlier, called 8 Streams. And I thought that's a really interesting project or group you're involved in of people trying to do good. Tell us a little bit about what led to that and what kind of benefits perhaps that's brought to kind of your mission.
Well, Scott Pyle realized that he was in a lot of partnerships on business transactions. They were transactional. And he had really never joined uh, a developmental for just his own life goals and everything with people who, and take myself out of the equation. I think I'm the token plebeian. These folks, the other folks, are pretty wealthy. Um, but with people that he thought were influencers and accomplished, but also resonated in their own core beliefs. And so he wanted to bring them together and then pursue to make a difference in marketed ways together. And so that's what we did. And in that
Mm-hmm.
group, like Brian Woods is in that group, Brian is just a genius. And the way that it's helped is we meet occasionally. Sometimes we all end up at a Maxwell event in Hawaii or something, but we at least have 4 meetings a year. We all pay our own ways. The way meals are paid is you put all everyone's credit card in a hat and you draw the credit card. And I learned the hard way that I shouldn't put my heavy American Airlines metal card in. They kept drawing it, and but I
Gotta watch out for that credit card roulette.
yeah,
That'll get you.
but I just don't. I do that, but I just don't pay for alcohol. So if they draw my name, the second card pays for alcohol. Um, and so it's really been helpful because a lot of these things have led actually to them meeting some of our friends for major business deals. And so this wasn't done
Mhm.
for business, but we've been going about 2 or 3 years now, and a lot of major deals have come through here. Also, we've helped each other, even at speaking engagements. A few of them, Ben Utech is in it. Ben is from the Colts, the Super Bowl
Ah.
tight end. Ben's a dear friend, and he's also a phenomenal singer. You should all book him, but he does culture. He helps companies with culture. Mike Brennan from Movement Mortgage is in it. If you're not familiar with Movement Mortgage, you should look them up. Mike Brennan. It's great being with Mike because Mike has sleeve tattoos, wears T-shirts, says
Yeah.
Movement. We go into some place and they don't give the time of day usually, and then all this, and we're just laughing because his company, Casey Crawford started. They gave $250 million to the school systems in the Charlotte area, in about a 4-year period. But it's just so funny the reception they get. It's sort of like Tyrus talks about that sometimes on TV, that people look at him and they don't treat him well until they feel he's famous. And so this has been an accountability group that you're not alone. So I'm in a chicken coop in the middle of cornfields in Indiana. But every morning, in fact, while we're sitting here, 3 texts came in about one of their business deals and asked for prayer. And, major deal with one of them. Another person involved, Johnny Moore. If you don't know Johnny, Johnny is really, really in the news a lot now. Just really coming to his own and speaks all over the world. And his speech at Indiana Wesleyan commencement was phenomenal. One person said the best that they'd ever heard. And it was right at the same time the Ohio State one was going on. And Ben Elmore, if you've seen the Come and See app with The Chosen, Ben's company had a lot to do with that. And he has his own company, Intevity, Land Slack, Eventide company. Actually, it's very similar to what you're doing. Eventide is, they only invest. If you're not using Eventide for your investment portfolio, you you might look into Eventide. Land Slack is there. And so, we and Damon Adcock, who is very involved in a lot of the worship movement, and he's actually the a COO for Pile Financial Investment, and we met we met at a Maxwell event at Maxwell's house. If you read my LinkedIn last week, that's when I played that joke on Maxwell. That's the day I met Damon Adcock. So yeah. So anyway, I would hope all of you have a group like this, that you're not doing it for transactions. We don't do this group for transactional benefit.
Yeah, it's important.
Yeah. Well, and I read that Maxwell post. Of course, I was focused on the part where somebody asked him to run for president. I thought, well, there you go.
That really happened. I mean, I'm telling you, when they asked me that question, it was like my immediate response was, "You'd get Trump with a filter. That's what you'd get." And so John's great. He's brilliant. Hope you have John on your show. John and I text every now and then. I just started sending him phrases. I said, "John, you're going to steal them anyway." And so every now and then,
Oh,
literally every now, he interviewed. We have a mutual friend, Tom Arrington, at Prasco Drug I talked to you about, and John told him, because the Prasco, they'd hired me for a couple of years to be the writer for Prasco over in Ohio, and here's this genius in the drug world and authorized generics. And John says, "Well, I want to get one thing straight." He said, "I'm going to give you 100% credit for everything you share here today in my book. And I'm going to take 100% of the royalties."
Well, he's such a brilliant guy. There's still some old tapes, I think, probably, that my parents had of John Maxwell telling stories about getting people into a great state on a horrible airline flight that I can still remember, and some lessons about marriage that he told long before I was married that I still remember from him. And, he's been such a lion. I was thinking, there was one thing that you were sharing that I definitely have to hear about, you turning down the presidency of a company, a giant $3.5 million signing bonus. Maybe that's bonus is about your book. Maybe that's related to the presidency. What kind of values are you kind of measuring that would make you sort of work sort of counterintuitively financially there?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be remiss not to say I do think about that sometimes. And it's a lot of money, and I wasn't expecting. I knew I was going to be offered the presidency that day. I didn't know that part of it. So we had spent the entire day and a half. Just, let's just say a city around Nashville. So I'm trying to keep this. And we loved the meetings and everything. And at the end, as they were talking to me, I started processing that if I did this, I wouldn't be able to write with the same freedom and clip. I probably couldn't keep my role with the Green family. And I really love working with them. And, David Green, there's these, afternoon with David Green that Bill High puts on that just are really beneficial for a lot of people. And to do that, to give that up, and then to walk away from Indiana Wesleyan, that's been, a home to me when I was homeless. And I hope I can still help them. An institution is a systematic response to recurring need. That's how I define it. And both those institutions, the museum and the university, I think are really on track doing good things. I just didn't feel like I could do that. And so as we shook, he said, "If all we have to do is shake hands." And he said, "We want you to know this comes with a $3.5 million signing bonus." And I think I kicked my wife under the table, to be honest. I mean, it was like, it's like, and I couldn't shake his hand. I just come from Robert Funk's ranch out in Yukon. Robert's the biggest Angus breeder, which he does for a hobby, but he's got this gorgeous ranch. But I think he has it's 600,000 people or so that are involved somehow in his employment agency. But he has statues. I have a LinkedIn post about this of two cowboys shaking hands on horses. And he said, "Jerry, all $69 million in transactions on those Angus cattle down the hill were on handshakes." And I started to ask, have they all come through? And he said, "I know what you're going to ask." And he said, "Only one is still outstanding. And the handshake didn't feel right when I did it." But with that in the background, I just didn't feel like I could shake his hand. And I just felt like I said, "Let me pray about it." I said, this is really an honor. And that night I was just really restless. And so I did come back to him. I said, the only way I could do it is this, and this, which would ensure that I could still do that. And there was no way to do everything. And so I passed on it. And not long after this comes up. So instead of getting a $3.5 million bonus, we end up helping to acquire a golf course, you know. So one is like money in the bank, and the other is like, well, and this golf course is doing well.
Oh
So
boy, don't we understand that?
yeah, so
Well,
that's that
it's
story, and I have no regrets, and I still stayed friends with the people, and actually, I still support them. I still send people their way. I still, tell people about them. I still try to follow up on what they're doing. I believe in what they're doing.
well, as we come to a close, I like to do a couple of quick final questions. This is our lightning round, if there is such a thing in the podcast space. But I love to do 90 seconds on anything that's important to you, something that's kind of off topic, maybe something that's occupying your time or captured your interest. I mean, as an author, there's probably a lot of that, but something that's just kind of off topic, but it's interesting to you at the moment.
Yeah, I have an article. If I publish it, it might, cost me contracts or something. But the whole thing about the opening of the Olympics just broke my heart. Because you have people doing things in the name of unity when it's the most divisive thing they could have done. And, I have studied archaeology. I've lived in Greece, as an NEH fellow. I've written a book chapter on the Olympics. I've worked with many, many, many Olympians. And so with that in the background and watching that is, how do you help people to have an informed, responsible response to that and to do it in a bipartisan way? And, so for me, that's preoccupying me. How do you get people back to endorse the law of non contradiction? And that simply is the basic law of logic, which means two opposite things cannot both be true at the same time in the same respect. And how do you do that? I'm in this chicken coop in northern Indiana, but I think that you can reach the world from anywhere today. I mean, in fact, when you asked me to be on this podcast, I started doing, for a long time, I didn't do hardly any social media. Working with billionaires and everything, I've tried to just not be on the front. And these things are different, and so I think now to try to reach the most people with messages about things like that. So that's something that's grabbed me, you know, that's grabbed me right now. And so yeah, I have put a lot of research into that recently.
Yeah. And it's really kind of dovetailing into another question we like to ask, which is what's the legacy you'd like to leave behind from all of the stuff you're working on, your writing, your higher ed work, your work at the Museum of the Bible? What's the legacy you imagine you'll leave behind?
First of all, I'd like to have at least one book with a long shelf life. A lot of the books
Mhm.
behind me, I've been very valuable to me. The other room are the books I've been fortunate to do, but to have one with a long shelf life, what is that? Is it 20 years? Is it 100 years? But I've studied history long enough to know that every civilization will collapse. At some point, the United States of America will cease to exist, whether it's 100 years, 500 years, and archaeologists will come along and start digging things up. And so I'll close with this. I'm very aware of that. In fact, when I was digging in Isthmia, which is by ancient Corinth, it's the site of the Olympics. It's where Nero won all of his awards. Even though he wasn't the best, they
Mhm.
gave him the gold or the wreath and everything. They found a trophy. I think it's Corinthius. I think it's Cornelius Corinthius. He's from there. It's an 8 foot flat slab that has wreaths. He was a musician. He used to have musical events in the Olympics. He was a flautist, played the flute, and his sons put up this huge, gorgeous marble. I think it's marble trophy. It's in the Isthmian Museum now because they wanted him to be remembered because he was from that area for the Panhellenic Games. So he's from that area. It's like Scotty Scheffler, when he wins a tournament in his hometown, or if there were one in Waco and he went to Baylor, it's like, oh, well, as I started looking at it, I went around to the side of it because it was found at Hadrian's Wall. So at some point, that statue, which was to help remember him for all times, was taken and put in a wall, a military wall under Hadrian. I mean, so it tells you that even though they thought they're all going to remember, no, we all have our season. Well, here's the interesting thing. I went around to the side of that statue and there were chariot ruts. It had been turned upside down in a road probably for centuries before it was put in Hadrian's Wall. And so it just tells you even more how short-lived. And so these famous athletes you have, unless they do one thing, unless they make a difference and capture it in word or song. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of these musicians. One of them on my website talked about had 1.2 billion downloads of The Golden Hour. If you've not heard Jake yet, it's a great song. But my challenge is that whatever you're doing, whether it's Liberty Spenders or whatever, you want to have it in a transferable form so that future generations can enjoy it. And they'll find it. I find books all the time that are 100 and some years old. And you find them quoted some places. You go back to the original. It just came from Lambeth Palace, and they had some of the early books of the queens that they were showing me. And so my challenge is to get it in writing and to get it in word. Do you know Orson Welles? I'll close with this. These places that people have written fascinate me. Michael W. Smith, I went to he used to have a little ranch house in the middle of Franklin,
Right.
and I was invited in there. The Jesus Freak House is next to it. Orson Welles, 1984.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
He wrote that at one of the Astor's property on a Scottish Isle, and he died like writing the thing. Basically, he died right after. It had no electricity and no running water, and he spent 2.5 years there. And that's where he
Wow.
wrote that book. Max Lucado wrote it in a closet on a mission field. One of his first books called The Gift about Christmas. And, you can go on. By the way, that song 1.2 billion was written in a bedroom in a parsonage in Rhode Island. Martin Luther King from Birmingham jail. So you can write things with a long shelf life from anywhere. St. John wrote the book of Revelation in a cave. Jerome translated the Vulgate in a cave in Bethlehem. And so you can do that. And so that's what I want to do. I want to.
Well,
Yeah.
I believe it. And you have a big why, a big enough why, and the talent. And, if it's God's will, we all know that will be done. So I know we have to wrap, but for those of you listening, just know you have now interacted or heard from what Kurt and I call the Kevin Bacon of the conservative and Christian movement. So well connected and such a great storyteller. We could go on and on and on. He's just a great guy to chat with. So thank you again for joining us, Dr. Pattengale.
No, thank you. I'm proud. I'm really proud of you too and all you've done.
Well, to get in touch with Jerry, which is always a privilege, find him at Jerry Pattengale on Twitter or at jerrypattengale.org. He's also great on LinkedIn. So follow Dr. Pattengale on LinkedIn to see more of what he's up to.
And thanks for tuning in. We invite you to join the Liberty Partnership community at libertyspenders.com. You can learn more about how we can help you engage with this audience. And you can also find some tools there to download. So we hope you check it out, libertyspenders.com. And until next time, thanks.